this Monday lunchtime. Really pleased to be back this month. Our first Talking Workplace Wellbeing lunch session was last month, and we were chatting with a couple of clients of ours from the public sector. The purpose of these sessions is, as I mentioned just now, a bit of a kind of follow-on from the Working Well virtual conference that Matt and I hosted in April. And the idea behind the conference and this community coming together is to offer peer-to-peer sharing, inspiration, learning and contact creation so that everyone can network, to support and help with our quests in supporting workplace wellness within the various industries and markets that we all work within. My name is Alicia, for those of you that haven't come across me before. I'm the director of a company called Founded Wellness. We provide quite holistic wellbeing activities for organisations across the UK. And my colleague here, Matt, to my left on my screen.
It's working now. It's working, so I'm chilled.
You're live. Okay, great. Matt, he is the director of CC Psychology. His work is more in the organisational psychology space. And Matt and I, over the past 5 years, have worked together here and there because the bodies of work that we both offer are quite complementary. So finally this year we got our kind of biggest project off the ground, which was the Working Well virtual conference. So Matt's going to host the conversation today with our three guests. Oliver Haddock, solicitor and founder of London Young Professionals Network, and Eloise Skinner, founder of the Purpose Workshop. You also have another business, don't you, Eloise? So I'll be looking forward to hearing a bit about that. And Caitlin McFee, so lawyer, coach, wellbeing consultant, and the founder of Law Life Balance. So we're really keen to hear everything that you guys have to say. So I'm going to hand over to Oliver for his chance to kind of introduce your work. Matt, was there anything more from you before we get started with that?
No, I think we're good. Yeah, it'd be great to hear more about what you all do.
Awesome. All right, Oliver, over to you. A couple of minutes on your work, what you do, why wellbeing is so important in the work that you're doing.
Amazing, thank you. Thank you so much, everyone, for having us, for the introductions. I mean, I'm in a very impressive crowd here. The intros to both Eloise and Caitlin, you could keep going forever because they have so much going on. So yeah, very pleased to be here with you all. So in terms of narrative, so my day job is a solicitor with Radcliffes Lebrasseur, 3 years qualified in commercial disputes. As more of a narrative, so I started off getting involved with the London Young Lawyers Group, which is Law Society affiliated, representing junior lawyers up to around 7 years PQE in London, funny enough. When I think it was about when I was qualifying and I realised that I sort of wanted to be networking maybe more with other industries, I then started looking at who else existed in our space in London, but maybe in different industries. And there are these amazing organisations. You've got the ICAW, the RICS, these big industry bodies who are all organising events for their own industry, doing really cool things, but no one was actually talking to each other. And it just struck me that as well as these sort of commercial networking elements, there are all these issues that affect all of us as young professionals. And that if we pooled our resources, pooled our ideas, we could actually be doing more to help each other. And our original work or wellness event was a really great example. It was hosted at PwC because one of the ICAW contacts got us the venue. I think with the young lawyers pulled in a sponsor, we had a few speakers brought in from other industries. So it was a really good example of how it's an issue that impacts all of us. The statistics within our industry in the legal world are horrendous around mental health and well-being, but all those people working in the city, all those young professionals have those issues. And so it's just a lovely forum to be able to run events and for us to maybe communicate within the industries. What issues do we share? What issues do we see differently in the different industries? So that's a great example of what we're hoping to achieve. And we've done a lot more on Zoom and virtually and on the Instagram and all that sort of stuff over the last year, but very much hoping to be back in person and doing more things like that in future.
Thanks, Ollie. Sorry, I struggled to unmute there.
All right.
Do you think maybe you've done more over the past year because Zoom makes things more accessible?
it's really interesting, we pivoted entirely, because when these two organisations were sort of set up, at their core are big in-person events. And I know that we actually, one of our LYPA committee meetings, we just sat around on Zoom and went, right, what have your issues been? And what have you, because they're all the same, we're all supposed to be doing the same thing, running these big events and hearing from different industries. So the barristers organisation, for instance, the Bar Council, their junior committee, they were saying a lot of their issues, because they're all self-employed, and that was something I hadn't even thought about. They were really concerned, and you can't just go on furlough if you're a barrister. So it was really interesting as a forum to exactly jump on Zoom, get together quite easily and hear what everyone else is thinking.
Yeah, I do think it's quite an interesting thing that's come up from this process, isn't it? That it's made connecting more accessible and addressing wellbeing within our industries. Thanks, Ollie. Eloise, we'll hand over to you. Can you give us a couple of minutes on your work and what you're doing and your background?
Sure, thank you. So hi everyone, I'm Eloise. I recognise a couple of names on this call, so sorry if you've heard me say this like 10,000 times by now. But I started out in corporate law. I trained in the city with a US law firm. I did a very traditional corporate training contract, and then I specialised in tax both here and in New York for a bit. And then spent about 3 years as an associate, and most recently in January of this year, I decided to take what I am still calling a career break, but who knows if it will be a permanent break or not, to basically pursue some other projects that I've been doing. So alongside my work as a lawyer, I was also really passionate about professional development, and that's how I kind of got to know Ollie back in the day, and all of the networks and stuff, and just working with events, conferences. I wrote a book for the Law Society. So just really passionate about giving junior lawyers the skills that they need to have a really fulfilling and interesting start to their careers. And yeah, so then I ended up moving a little bit more into the personal professional development space and a little bit away from my actual legal job. So I ended up getting a book deal at the end of last year, and I was a bit oh, these two things I'm not going to be able to run in parallel for much longer in the way that the job was demanding. And I mean, that comes onto ideas like flexible work and hybrid working, and could that have been managed, those two things together? And I think really what the pandemic did was gave me an opportunity just to really make a clear distinction between this path and this path. And so I decided to take the break and leave my job. And so I have a book coming out in October. I also run a consultancy business that kind of supports the book, and I'm focusing that mostly on social impact. So working with people from disadvantaged backgrounds, like schools and university level students. And then I have another business that I'm working on with Oxford University at the moment, and that is more of an ed tech business.
Amazing. Was there a particular motivation as to sort of taking this leap into doing something outside of the kind of career path that was ahead of you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it had been more of a slow process of just getting more and more interested in different things. And then obviously law is one of those careers that in its most traditional form, you really are in or you're out. And I think at some other firms, there might have been more flexibility. There might have been different paths or options that I could have taken. But I think when you're really in the kind of heart of the corporate legal world, the path is pretty clear, even with all the more modern ways of working. And I think, the next step of my career was just demanding a level of intention and time and commitment that I wasn't sure that I wanted to give. So, I mean, it wasn't that I didn't want to do it. It was more I wanted to take some time and figure out, are these other interests going to lead me down a different path, or do I actually just want to take a break, do that, and then come back? And I'm still not entirely sure, but that's where I am.
Yeah, well, I love that. I think it's good, isn't it, to keep all the interests going and plates spinning and not kind of close off doors to things. So good on you for following those aspirations. It sounds very exciting, everything you've got going on. And then Caitlin, we'd love to hear from you. So tell us a bit about what you've got going on.
Thanks, Alethea. Thanks, everyone. I hope this is going to work okay, because I keep getting a notification that my internet is unstable, much like the past 18 months have been. But anyway, we'll see how we go. So I'm Caitlin. I'm a solicitor, but also the founder, as you said earlier, Alethea, of Law Life Balance. And I suppose a brief story behind that is that during my training contract, I experienced at work a period of really acute anxiety and I suppose a bit of burnout, which came off the back of just years and years and years of pushing myself way too hard and having way too high expectations of myself that were completely unrealistic. And as a consequence of having that period of time out of work, I came back with a renewed attitude of putting my well-being at the top of my agenda at all times. And through doing that, also made mental health in particular a real focus. So I sat on the steering committee of Thriving from the Start during my training contract, which is the City Mental Health Alliance's Young Professionals Network, which is then also how I met Ollie. And that really kind of ignited my passion for helping to drive the mental wellbeing agenda in the legal industry. And that's really what led me to Law Life Balance. So I was lucky enough to get a really great secondment over this last year. So I've been working at a mental health charity. And that's really opened my eyes as well to the impact of the pandemic on mental health generally, but also obviously I've still got a lot of friends and colleagues and connections in the legal industry that have also in many cases been struggling. So Law Life Balance was really my solution, I hope, to trying to solve some of these wellbeing issues. At the forefront of my mission is really to help make the law more sustainable for people in the long term. I think we see high levels of burnout, high levels of people feeling that, you know, it's kind of up and out is the only solution. And I really want that to change. I think there's a lot we can do to change it. And I think now is a great window of opportunity. So yeah, that's the mission. I'm a trained NLP practitioner and hypnotherapist. So starting to work with clients one-on-one to help them implement like better mindset techniques into life, really, to enable them to feel more empowered in their life and at work, with a hope that that will also help them find long-term sustainable happiness in their careers.
Love that. It's really nice alignment to something that Matt and I talk about quite a bit, which is that you know, it's quite easy when we're talking about well-being and work to sort of put work as the baddie, and this sort of villain role, and that, you know, work is killing us and causing all this burnout. But actually our careers are really very fruitful, aren't they, whether it's to do with the financial freedom that it gives us, or, you know, the professional development and the you know, the purpose in life. And actually well-being plays a really strong role in helping to create longevity and success, like well-being success in our careers. So yeah, I love that message. And how's it going? How long has Low Life Balance been around? How's it being received?
So I mean, I suppose the ideas of it started in January. I set it up more officially in March, and it's been a really organic process of me also figuring out exactly what I want to do with it. But yeah, the receipt of it has been really positive. And now it's just about kind of being a bit more laser focused in exactly what I want to achieve, and setting some goals over the next few months. So yeah, it's a lot of work to be doing alongside another full-time job. But yeah, I'm finding my balance. It's one of my main values.
Good. And one thing I always think with this type of work, where you're working kind of like one-to-one with an individual as well, is you know, the impact of just helping one person is just so valuable. And actually when you get those moments, it kind of you know, makes it all very worthwhile. So we can obviously kind of scale our businesses and think about the future, but actually I'm sure already you're kind of making a big impact with the people that you've managed to help and reach. So
thank you.
Great to hear from you. All right, I'm going to hand over to Matt. He's going to kind of give us a little bit of a structure for the rest of the time that we've got this morning, and guide us through some chat. So enjoy, everyone.
Yeah, thanks Alethea. Yeah, we got asked for a bit more structure after the last session, right, which is not my style, but I'll try anyway. So as a broad bit of structure, well, we will keep it fairly free flow, to be perfectly honest, but I wondered whether we could at the start kind of explore a few trends that you're seeing, you know, so what's going on in the world of, well, your worlds, but the world of well-being more generally. Recently, how's that changed perhaps over the last 12 to 18 months of everything that's gone on and the world ending around us? So a piece there around kind of what are the trends and what's going on now, also looking at what's going on in the professional services industry. That would be really interesting to hear from you about, whether there's some specific challenges and opportunities. but also with young people as well. I used to be a young person. I am a millennial, but that's not young now, is it? It's Gen Z or something. But what's going on what are the challenges that young people face? And it'd be great to hear your thoughts on that. And then, just move on more generally to what are some of the challenges going forward, but also the last bit will be, what does the future look like? Have we got any opportunities that we want to take forward? So with that in mind, what about the trends? So fairly broad question to open up. So Ollie, do you want to go first? Or what are you seeing as kind of trends in the world of workplace wellbeing recently?
Good question. I actually think I'm going to start more gloomily, because I think that leads into the trends, because, we all know what's happened over the last year. That has made wellbeing very difficult for so many of us. And the reasons why we are attached to our employer or our work group are the social interaction, the traditionals, the chats around the coffee machine and all that sort of thing. And that was taken away, right? So we're seeing a lot more movement in terms of trends. We're seeing a lot of attrition in a lot of industries, not just my own. People are moving because, why do we stay somewhere? Well, if those reasons are taken away, if someone comes along and says, I'll offer more money, and you're like, well, if I'm going to sit at home in my living room and try and work, then I'm not getting any social interaction anywhere else. So if the money goes up, so that it's a bit of a shame, but I think people are seemingly much more willing to jump around a bit right now and move. Yeah. And so going forward, it'll be interesting to see how people do manage this return to the office. Speaking quite honestly, the big opening up that happened last week, I think that a lot of employers, certainly mine, have said, it's just not safe to start changing the message yet. So because of the Delta variant that's flying around. So how will people manage that? Will people say, make sure you're coming in at the same day every week so we can actually see each other? Because that's gonna help. Are we gonna make sure that actually we have more organized get-togethers after work? Because if you're only gonna be in 2 days a week, actually people are gonna start putting things in diary more. Are we going to have more structured team meetings? We may have used to have them once a month. Are we going to try and now do them once a week, again, to just give a bit of social interaction to each other? So yeah, it's all those questions. I think it's such a difficult time now to try and wish cast how it's going to end up, but it's going to be all of those questions about how people manage that. And employers that get it wrong, I think, will really suffer, because they will lose their juniors. I think people that say, in 5 days a week, completely rigid, no flexibility, you will lose juniors, because people are seeing that is not the way the world is going right now. And then the other way, it's how you manage going back and how you manage those social interactions. Yeah. So it's difficult to put a finger on specific trends, but I think that's the interesting question of how employers manage this next stage.
I've literally just had a light bulb moment when you the first sentence you said there, because I've heard that a lot about the attrition going up and, people moving roles and all that sort of thing. And I wasn't sure why, I wasn't sure the mechanism behind that. But the way that you've described it there, you feel it's maybe because, if I'm understanding this correctly, perhaps you've got a little less loyalty towards your team or towards the organization. Is that right?
I think 100%, and this isn't a personal point. This is just what are the things that keep you at an organisation. Of course, when you go to any job interview, you want to know the salary, but actually there are so many things that keep you there, and that's the relationships. That's all those things we just mentioned. And if they're suddenly not there, then the attraction of staying is lessened.
Yeah, I've heard that over the years. People who say to me, I'm so stressed in my job, there's this, that, the other, all the rest of it. And I'm like, why don't you just leave? And they're like, well, I've got a great team. I really like the people I work with. And that's what keeps them there, right? Yeah. But do you think there's a balance there between, so if we're moving to, so you mentioned that you don't think young people will want, 5 days in the office. So how do you create some of that loyalty if you've not got that, proximity to people?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. So I think there's going to have to be an element of flexibility. And then I think employers or managers are going to have to be better at structuring things so that you're going to see people on a regular basis. So, if it's Tuesday and Wednesday is the days people are going in, you try and make sure more of the team are there. So the one day you go in, you're not sat there on your own, because, what's the point in doing the commute? So I do think there's going to be a big element of managers having to be much more organized. Because what's the big thing everyone always talks about? It's culture. How do you do culture when you're sat at home? And all these big business names, not just in the professional industries, but your Zuckerbergs of the world, they say culture is key. Well, how do you create an organizational culture with everyone spread all over the country? That's going to be the question, and sadly I don't have an answer, but we can maybe throw it around, but that is going to be the big question of the next 5 years, of how organizations manage that.
Yeah, sounds good. Eloise, Caitlin, I'm sure you could answer that question.
Nice easy one.
Or unless you want to talk more generally about those trends that you're seeing. Are you seeing something similar or something slightly different? Eloise, do you want to go?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think everything Ollie said is like spot on, really. I think corporate law is maybe uniquely one of those careers that once you strip away the kind of social and interaction element from it, it becomes something quite different, actually, because the actual job of a corporate lawyer is very kind of isolated in a way. Like, you're really just working on a document most of the time, especially if you're not like client facing, which you wouldn't necessarily be at a junior stage. So I think for a lot of junior corporate lawyers, it's been, when you take away the environment of the city and they're like going out for lunch and they're talking with the partners and like the sort of office environment and the culture, then yeah, it does become a slightly different job. And I think a lot of people have been reevaluating, like, is it really the job that I want, or is it like the whole package, which doesn't really exist in that form anymore? So yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what if there will be a perfect answer to the culture problem. I think one thing that I've seen a lot is a real diversity of approaches to like junior people, what they want, what they're getting, what they are trying to create for themselves. So the pandemic was one of those things that like it happened to all of us, but all of us like responded and reacted in a different way and had completely different experiences. And so I think some people have discovered that they actually love being at home on their own and they want to have that as their basic working pattern. And some people have really missed it and want to go back into the office and just have a team around them. And those could be two people in the same, like at the same level in the same team. And so I think now not only do you have to deal with the issue of like firm culture, but you also have to deal with the diversity of approaches that you're going to have even within a small group of people. And then the other thing I think is like, what can we do digitally? Like, what are the alternatives to kind of being in person? And I think again, for like corporate law or corporate careers in general, it's like they are international careers and that you're constantly working on international deals. You're talking to people like all across the world. Like, in a previous life, we'd be like flying out for conferences and like meeting people from other offices and stuff. And it's like, okay, if that world doesn't exist anymore, or if it doesn't need to exist, like maybe for environmental reasons, it probably shouldn't exist. What can we do like as a replacement or as an alternative? And then you see all these interesting things like, virtual conferences and like stuff like this, I guess, which you never really would have had an opportunity to do before, to bring so many people together and like live stream it. That just wouldn't have been as normal as it is now. So I think even though there are a lot of problems and like I don't think personally anyone has the perfect solution, there are also a lot of opportunities, especially in the tech industry.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. It's that mass kind of break, right? The fact that it's affected everybody at the same time. So it's not just one industry, not just one country. It's affected everybody, and everyone's trying to work it out at the same time, I guess, which makes it difficult, but at the same time really interesting as an opportunity. Yeah, thanks, Eloise. Caitlin, anything to add on that? Or you can pick a completely new theme if you want, a completely new trend.
Well, I thought it was probably quite a nice segue onto talking about actually what maybe some of the good things are to come out of the pandemic. But the only thing I would have quickly added is I read this article a couple of weeks ago which talked about this concept of epiphany quitting, which is essentially, and I think this applies a lot to young professionals who've literally had an epiphany over the last 18 months or so, sat at home in a flat share around a kitchen table with 4 people thinking, is this really what I want to do for the rest of my life? And strip away the positives, as both Ollie and Eloise have just discussed, what's left. And so you have seen a lot of people kind of trying to find something a bit more purposeful that gives them more of that. Or on the flip side, you've seen people going, well, if I'm getting paid what I'm getting paid to do this, and I don't have any of the other stuff, maybe I will just go to a firm that pays more and do that for now. But the question then is going to be, what's the long-term cost of that? And we don't know the answer to that yet. It's just quite an interesting thing to have in the back of our minds, I think.
Okay, that's interesting. Do you know, there's something here as well that's kind of going through my head, and apologies if I can't articulate the question correctly, but so a couple of you mentioned at the start, you know, the challenge of working particularly as a young professional. A couple of you have mentioned the legal industry. Caitlin, I was having a look at your website before today, and there's a big strapline about how stressed everybody is in the legal industry as well, and the impact that it has on their mental health. So I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like from some of the things that you've been saying that you'd like to see a change in the traditional culture within some of these organizations, perhaps. But then we were just having the conversation that actually the culture has been kind of chucked up in the air, and we want to get back to not where we were, but I knew I wouldn't be able to articulate this, but how do you get that balance? Is this an opportunity to create something new, or how does that work?
Yeah, I know exactly what you're getting at. And I think it's going to be a challenge, but I think the really important point here, which is coming out as a theme in everything I'm reading and everyone I'm speaking to, is that the thing that has been lacking to date, and the thing that actually has the biggest impact on our overall sense of well-being, is autonomy. And particularly for young professionals and junior lawyers, autonomy has often been really lacking. Right. So whilst you may have had quite a flexible working culture, as a firm or as an organization, that doesn't always apply to the juniors. And there are really good reasons for that, because particularly in the law, you know, as a junior, you need a lot of supervision. And a lot of junior lawyers have found the pandemic really challenging in that they haven't had that level of supervision that they require to gain the skills and the knowledge and the confidence. So you do need that. But at the same time, if you don't give people the power or the permission to put their needs first, then ultimately what happens is you have this entire industry of people ignoring what those needs are. And as we all know, if you don't do the things that keep you well, if you consistently sacrifice your own needs, then ultimately your well-being declines. And when your well-being declines, so does the quality of your work, so does the amount of work that you can do, more mistakes get made. So it's really going to be about finding that balance of flexibility and autonomy to give people the best of both worlds, I suppose. But as both Eloise, and Ollie have said, just mix the two names together there, I think there is no one size fits all solution. It's going to be a work in progress. And I think it also has to be a really collaborative effort. I don't think this is the time for there to be competition between organizations on like who's got the best attitude to well-being. This needs to be about collectively as industries and colleagues, if we care about success and we care about happiness and well-being, we kind of need to come together and work out what's going to be best in this kind of arena, is my personal view anyway.
Okay, that's interesting. Do you think that's realistic?
Great question. Who knows? I definitely think that it's something we should be trying to do more. I think it's previously always been a differentiating factor, and I don't believe that it should be.
Yeah, no, I don't know the answer either. It's interesting to me because look, I'm in the business of behavior change, right? And it's always there's two ways of coming at it. You could say, look, the industry in general, and again we're broad brushes here, but the industry in general, it's competitive. You know, it's got winners, it's got losers. You know, it's private sector, right? And it's capitalist society. So do we harness that and use that to make well-being work? You know, so do you make that competitive as well, or do you, like you've just mentioned there, kind of say, well, no, let's take a step back from all of that and do something completely different? I guess only time will tell, right? Ollie, you look like you were going to
it comes off because Kate and I actually had a similar conversation to this over the last week, and it comes off the back of it. So there is at the moment, and again, just speaking for my own industry, and I'm sure it's the same for others, a drive for talent, a need for talent, because people are leaving the industry. And actually, oddly enough, our world has been incredibly busy. There is a huge drive for talent, and the obvious way of bigger firms trying to get that talent is by salaries going skyrocketing. So whilst the world is crumbling down around us, the legal industry's top 20 firms have been ratcheting up the salaries of their NQs, huge six-figure sums for what could be 24, 25-year-olds. That brings with it, and a discussion we were having is that brings with it its own challenges, because when people of that age are being paid that much, there is, I think, in some firms, this idea that, well, listen, we've sort of got a right to your time now. We've got you, that's it. We're paying you all this money. And that just leads into all the issues we're having. And one of the conversations I'd like to have, and I think is such an important one, I genuinely think if one of the top 10 firms said this at your interview, listen, rather than paying you that, we're going to pay you that, but we've actually, over the next year, going to employ a third more people, and we're going to put you and your mental well-being at the forefront. We're going to make sure you have weekends. You're still going to get the best work because you're at a brilliant firm that's the name, I won't name names, but you're an amazing firm. You're still going to get a great quality of work. But actually, we're going to pay you just an eye-watering sum, not a ridiculously eye-watering sum. Still a huge amount for a 20-something-year-old. But we're going to look after you, and you will have weekends, all these sorts of things. I think the first firm that does that it will work. I do think that model would work, because I think, especially over the last year, but I think actually for a few years, the burnout levels are so high, and people can see it coming, and people in the industry or juniors in the industry are unhappy because of it. So I do think that there would be a rush to anyone that adopted that model.
Interesting. Yeah. No. And so you don't know of any organisations that are doing that already, no?
To be fair, there are some, I think Linklaters, and correct me if I'm wrong, Caitlin, but I think they've started doing, is it timeshare type options? I think a few people have gone towards it and stuck a toe in, but no one that's really come out and said, look, this is going to be our model going forward. We're actually going to employ more people and play a third less or whatever it is.
Yeah. I think a few firms have done that, and a few have done, particularly I think in Europe, they've done trials of, for example, fixing hours at 40 hours a week and paying 80% salary or something like that. Don't quote me on those numbers. Yeah, I think there are a few firms who are trialing different ways of working. It just remains to be seen which one is going to actually be successful, if any. That's
what it needs, though. It needs primary level like job design interventions, doesn't it? Because you'll all know, right? The well-being is it's often seen as the sprinkles on top. It's like, do your day job, get the emails done, get the to-do list done. And if you've got any time at the end of the week, sorry, Alethea, do a little bit of yoga or eat an apple or something. Well-being tick. Whereas we all know that that's not what makes it sustainable, right? Over time. I've got one final question. Sorry, Eloise, I will involve you unless you've got anything to add to this part of the conversation as well. But just about so I'm thinking, like, why do people work in those cultures, right? Why are they drawn? Well, I guess I can ask you, why are they drawn towards those cultures and that industry, even if they've kind of got an inkling? Or do you think they don't have an inkling that it might be quite hard once they get there?
I mean, I can definitely say from my perspective of like being a corporate lawyer, I think a lot of people go into it for the pressure. And I know that sounds kind of like, oh my God, why would anyone do that? But I think if you go to an elite sort of university that you have a huge group of students studying law and they've chosen it because it's like, one of the most challenging, difficult things to study at university. And then you take those people and you ask them what kind of career they want. I think they want something that is incredibly demanding, like incredibly challenging. They want like a high-powered environment. Like I work with these students who are trying to apply to law firms all the time. And I think they're being honest when they say, like, I want somewhere that's going to really push me and challenge me. And, from personal experience, that's what I wanted as well. And it's actually one of the reasons that I didn't go into another field of law, was because corporate law seemed like the thing that was going to make me kind of the most powerful, like effective person that I could be. And so I think, it's a really interesting point that Ollie made about like the salaries, because I don't think people are naive when they go into corporate law jobs and they pay you six figures when you're 24 and you're like, well, why am I being paid this much? Well, it's because of the demands of the job. Like the job reflects the amount that you're being paid, because, it does mean that you give up your weekends, you give up family holidays. I don't think I had a vacation for years where I wasn't like checking my phone, but at the same time, I was being paid more than both of my parents put together because of the job that I was doing. And in a way, like, obviously, like everyone's, well-being should be a priority, but in a way, those jobs were like, they did reflect what they were saying that they were. And I think a lot of people go into them with the intention of like, I'm going to work really hard. Maybe I'll do it for a few years and then I'll move out, or maybe I want this my whole career, or, you know, so I think there is a space in the job creation market for a job that is like that, for people that want that and who can, you know, manage their own well-being really well, and who are like focused and driven and just want to go for it, even if it's just for a few years. But I think what Ollie was saying that was really interesting is that there will be also people who are not aware that that is what they're going into. And for those people, 100% there should be, you know, it should be clear up front of like, there's another way that you can go into this profession without doing the kind of like traditional route of like, just go in and give your whole self for a while at least. And so if there was a job that kind of was a hybrid model or reflected like, you know, actually my priorities are different, like my priority is to put my family first, or to put my own well-being first, or, you know, any other various number of priorities, and the salary then reflected like the amount of hours that you're going to do, or the amount of commitment that you're going to do, you know, you can draw lines around your working week and your weekends or your holidays or whatever, then I think that would be such a beneficial thing, and like a lot of people would really appreciate that. But, you know, I'm not convinced that there isn't a space at all for the people who 100% just want to go for it, even for a few years. And I think, you know, going for a really intense training contract and working for a really demanding firm, like in London and also on Wall Street, like did make me a much more well-rounded, like resilient, motivated, determined lawyer. And I think it gave me a skill set that I will keep now for life. So I think, you know, there are kind of two sides to it, and I'm definitely in favor of like the hybrid model, but as an option, I guess, I think there could be a variety of options.
Yeah. So how do you, and this is like the hardest question ever, how do you shift a culture when that exists, when you've got that pool of people? So for example, you know, I'm using stereotypes here, but using examples off the top of my head. So like teaching, right? So there's getting to teaching, and there's the NHS and whatnot. There is not, as far as I'm aware, a huge pool of people who attend university or whatever it may be with the sole intention. There's people, but there's not as big a pool of people with the sole intention of going into those sorts of jobs, which is why they have to do a lot of work around kind of branding and attracting the right people to those types of roles. Whereas it seems like, you know, things like the legal industry, the people are there. So where's the motivation for the firms to change? Because if the people are there and they'll always be there, and you can treat them like that and they'll still be there, why would you change?
Yeah, well, I think it comes back to kind of the things that Caitlin was talking about. Like, it doesn't work for everyone. And I think not everyone is like willing or actually happy to follow, like not every employee will want to follow that model. And then you get people where you get like the attrition rates and the burnout rate, and people just not being able to like function well in that environment and not being happy in that environment. And so I think then the firms have a motivation to step in and say, like, actually from a business and financial perspective, like, you know, obviously from an employee wellbeing perspective, that should be number one. But if you're thinking about like the firm's priority, they want to keep as many employees there, like in a fulfilled way as possible, so that they can be a successful law firm or whatever. And then I think you have a real motivation for them to say, actually, there needs to be more of a nuanced model here. We can't just be running this same like sort of setup for everyone. Like, not everyone flourishes in the same set of circumstances. So I think, yeah, there is probably a financial and as well as a sort of very human incentive.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Ollie.
I'd come in on that as well. So I think for the industries that you're talking about, so let's say finance and law, you are really looking at the top end talent, and actually there isn't that much of it around. So
Right.
There may be hundreds of universities with lots of law courses, but actually attracting that really high-end talent. And in that fight for that top talent, it's really marginal. So the salaries is, you know, they all know what each other are doing. So it's what else are you offering? And a really interesting conversation I had with a friend of mine from Goldman Sachs. And he said, we are putting so much time and effort into grad recruitment at the moment. Honestly, we are just having to really, really ramp it up. And I sort of said, but you're Goldman Sachs. What, people come to you. What are you talking about? He said, no. These days, people go to Google, people go to Facebook, people want to go and work for cool tech organizations because you can make real good money. And what they offer is much more holistic, and they do try and push well-being, and you can have as many holidays as you want. So actually, there is a bit of a talent drain for some of these old-fashioned professions.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. So do you think, so you're quite close, obviously, with your young professionals network? Do you think that's a shift in values of people?
I think we're seeing the start of it. I do, and I think this is sort of the tried and, we've all talked about how working from home has changed things, but I do think people have changed their views slightly on what they actually want, because they are getting that flexibility. So maybe putting wellness and well-being, it's shifted up slightly in the ranks.
Yeah, interesting. Caitlin, have you got anything to add to that point?
The only thing I was just thinking was, I don't actually know whether it's that people's values are changing. I think it's that people are actually starting to think about what their values are for the first time. And I think a lot of the time, especially when you're young and you're at university and, your family have always said they'd be proud of you if you were a lawyer or a banker or whatever, and you kind of go through the university track and you are concentrated so much on getting that job. I don't actually know how many people ever stop to actually take the time to think, what do I care about? What do I like? Like, what does make me happy? And I think the pandemic has given people so much more time, but also like a lot more of a reason to actually care about not just their health, but also the time they get with their loved ones. I mean, so many people have lost loved ones and are now probably thinking, oh, if only I'd not worked so hard and I'd been able to spend more time with them over the past few years. So I think it's more that people are having time now to act, or have had time to think about these things, and are now starting to realize that, this is the only life that they have, depending on what they believe, but certainly in this particular format, and they have to make the most of it. And it's not guaranteed that you're going to get the next day or the next year. And so actually, how do you want to spend every one of those days? That's definitely what I've witnessed. And I think that's the shift that I've seen.
Do you know, that's really interesting. There's a psychological theory linked to that. I'm not going to be able to remember the name of it because it's very long. I can link it afterwards in the notes, but when I find out what it is. But I found a fascinating study when the world ended, and the pandemic kicked off. Me being an absolute geek, first thing I went and read about SARS and thought, what did we learn from SARS? And one of the things was they talked about values. They collected data about people's values before, during, and after the SARS outbreak in 2003 in Hong Kong. And they found that pre-epidemic or pre-pandemic, there was a big disparity between age groups. So older people had much more meaningful goals, emotionally meaningful goals, whereas younger people, it was more goal focused. It was more, what do I want to achieve? What do I want to do next? And what they saw was, by collecting data the whole way through, that during the height of the epidemic, that gap disappeared, that younger people had more emotionally meaningful values. And the mechanism behind it was because you were reminded of the finality of life, because older people, right? If you're over 80, 85, you start thinking about your family more because you might not have forever left. And that was being brought into sharper focus for younger people as well. And that'd be really interesting to see whether that's happening now. Hopefully someone's collecting some data about it, some smart person in a university. But yeah, I find that really interesting, that whole kind of values piece there. I had one question that I wanted to sneak in before we run out of time, which was around the management of, again, young people. I'm talking like young people at a different species, but do you think do young people, in inverted commas, need managing differently, with perhaps their different expectations of the roles or their different psychological contract? Or do you think that's overstated? Do you think that they're just human beings and they need managing like everybody else has needed managing? What do you think?
Differently from what, though, just to clarify?
Differently from older people. I'm meaning generationally, really. So I'm meaning, does this generation need something new in terms of managing them that previous generations may not have needed? So stereotypically, again, you might have thought back in the day, you just get on with it, right? Just get on with it. A lot more challenge focused rather than supporting people. Do you think people in this new generation coming through need a bit more of that support, or do you think, like I say, that's overstated?
So I think, so my view would be that there are different challenges now from what there has previously been for young people, but also for older people. And that's particularly around tech. And it's more so now after the pandemic. If you were a professional, but a lawyer, 20 years ago, when you left work and that was it. Now you leave work, but you've got your phone and your emails and you've got your laptop that you can take with you, and you're contactable and connected all of the time, even when you're on holiday. So I think it's really, really hard to switch off. And I think that's had an impact on well-being that previously didn't exist. That said, I don't think that it's about necessarily managing young people any differently. I do, though, think that management can be made a lot better. So I don't know that the level of education that anybody gets about management, and I'm talking particularly in the legal industry, but I'm sure this is true in other professional services too, I don't think it's adequate. I don't think that people really have the information at their hands that they need, especially when it comes to managing people's well-being. And I also don't necessarily think that juniors turn up for day one in their jobs with all of the life skills that they need. You know, and some people might have had great life experience and have more of those, but I also think there's so much more that can be done in the education system generally and industry specific that can give people those tools to thrive. So I think it's kind of more training and more education would never go amiss, in my view.
Yeah.
I don't know what others think on that.
Yeah. Any other thoughts?
Completely agree. I'll tell one story anecdotally because it will go to Caitlin's first point, which is my dad was a lawyer for a long time, and one of his great old friends gave me a week's work experience in my first summer at uni. It was the first time I'd gone anywhere near the law, and I walked through the door and he said, I wouldn't let my kids anywhere near this industry. When your dad and I started out, we were in the pub by 5, and let me tell you, kid, it ain't like that anymore. And that maybe should have been the penny dropping, but that is the difference. So yeah, the pressures are completely different. Having your emails on you the whole time, the idea of working till 2 a.m., which happens for a lot of people very regularly, it just didn't happen. So the pressures are completely different. And to get on the back of Caitlin's second point, I couldn't agree more, certainly with our industry. And it's not a slight on any individual, it's that I don't think anyone is really trained as a manager. You become more senior as a lawyer and therefore assume a managerial or a team leading position. But I don't think enough has been done to train people, because I don't think it was a priority, because they could be billing, or in any industry you could be doing something else. So yeah, agreed. I don't think it's necessarily specific to this generation, because presumably every generation's elder managers have to think about a different generation's worth of needs and wants and desires, and that's always going to sort of change as you go up. But given what we were saying at the start, which is that the world has changed, the pressures are much more, it's probably more in focus in this generation.
So that challenge comes up a lot with some of the work that I do as well, not just in the professional services industry. You get it in all sorts, engineering, right? Where you've got these absolutely brilliant, technically skilled engineers who are great at their job. And the only way to progress is to take on managerial responsibility, something that they are completely unprepared for. They don't want
to. Don't want it. Some people don't want to be manager.
No. Yeah. Is there a model? Do you know of any organizations that are using models? So for example, in the engineering firms, there's one that I worked with quite recently. They created these 2 tracks, right? They said you can be a specialist and get to a very high pay and seniority without the business, without having to manage someone. Whereas you can actually be slightly more junior, but managing a big group of people, if that plays to your skills. Do you know if that's happening in the professional services industry?
I certainly have heard discussions about models like that, and I think there's a lot of scope for them to happen. I think it might be quite interesting. So when that very, very senior person that's been there for a long time but doesn't want a managerial role is suddenly being told what to do by they're probably not a grad, but you know what I mean? It might create an interesting dynamic, but that shouldn't take away from the fact that model, I think, is a good one and should be looked at.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Like, I have seen, in the US, like the firm that I worked for had sort of similar options in that in a slightly different way, like the role of a partner is completely different to the role of an actual lawyer. Like a partnership role is very much client focused, about, essentially like being a business owner. And I think the way they deal with people who actually don't want to run a business but do still want to be a senior lawyer is to have like a partner position, and then kind of on the same level but more actual technical specialized knowledge of whatever they call it, counsel or senior lawyer or whatever. That's slightly different. In a way, I kind of think everyone should have people skills training, like whether you want to manage someone or not, just because being like a human in an organization. Like it's quite, even if you were like the most technical engineer, I think, you know, it helps to have some kind of managerial or people management role, because you are still going to be interacting with junior people, and, you know, junior people really benefit from senior people who are trained in things like giving feedback, you know, managing them, looking after their well-being, mentoring them, coaching them, all of those kind of things. But yeah, the only other thing I was going to say was, and I kind of forgot what the original question was, but what I wanted to say was that Caitlin's point about autonomy earlier is like one of the most distinctive factors, I think, in that like junior people now have a very personalized experience when it comes to pretty much everything in life. Like you can really personalize your, like the content you're receiving and the kind of path that you take for yourself and the education that you get. And, you know, there's a lot of information out there. And if you're willing to learn, there's a lot that you can like make your own about your career. And so I think maybe one of the like shifts in generational guidance is to let people have that autonomy and just make a lot of information and education accessible to them and almost let them shape their own careers. And it comes back to that idea of like, maybe there could be different options of how you can be a lawyer in the corporate legal world or any part of the legal sector, and that you don't just have to follow this one path, but you're actually provided with the education and the information and the knowledge and the connections that you can make your own decision about actually what it is you want. And maybe you can try something out, and then if it doesn't really work for you or you don't enjoy it, you can do something else. And so you're always like crafting your own career.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The key is inclusion, right, Eloise? Because we want to make the most of people's individual preferences, traits, skills, but at the same time, as we were talking about before, create a culture of belonging. You know, you don't want to, you know, obviously we're moving to, there's things like the gig economy, you know, coming up and becoming much more prevalent. But I don't know your thoughts, maybe I'm completely wrong, but I think that there'll always be organizations where everybody's under the same umbrella and they all share some sort of shared set of values. So we want that, but at the same time, that personal approach for those individuals. And it's a balance between those two, perhaps. Or maybe it's not a balance, maybe it's just integrating those two. Yeah. Okay. So we've got like 6 minutes left. So I want to ask you, kind of bringing together everything we've talked about, really. The last piece in terms of what are you focusing on in the next few months, the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months? What are you focusing on? What do you think the businesses that you're working with and the individuals that you're working with will be focusing on over that sort of time period going forward? Caitlin, do you want to go?
Sure. Thanks. So I think on a personal level, for me, it's going to be about optimizing my life for health and happiness. I think that's definitely been my learning over the past 18 months, is that I want that for me. In terms of the businesses I'm working with, I think obviously it's going to be around transitioning back to the workplace. It's going to be about helping individuals through things that they're struggling with. It might be anxieties about returning. It might be about everything we've spoken about today, you know, suddenly having a bit of a values crisis or feeling misaligned in their careers, feeling disempowered, not really sure how to navigate things going forwards. So I'll be really focusing on that. There's also new joiners time coming up. So there'll be a lot of people entering the profession. I think that's a really good opportunity to give them some more knowledge and some more skills. So yeah, I'll be working a lot with individuals and with firms and other organizations on all of those topics.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Caitlin. Ollie?
I think the point that Caitlin made about how organisations, you know, what's on the agenda for them, you know, we touched on it already, but that is it. How do you manage this big question of bringing people back? That's it. But for me, and I think people should not just see that as the employer's obligation, but really start thinking critically about what works for you, because you may have a rule of 2 days a week, but actually you may find, and the reason I say this, I've started realising that when I spend a week just at home on my own, I'm not that efficient. And I've started noticing that. And by Thursday, I'm sort of thinking, well, I've been here for so long, you know, all that sort of stuff. So I'm now going to really make an effort to try and get out and about, whether that's going into the city and co-working, whether it's going to the office, whatever it is. I think that's the way I'm going to work best. So yeah, people should not just put that all onto the organisation they're with and say, you set the policy, it's your problem. Really have a think about how you work best.
I love it. That creating a bit of that personal responsibility as well. There's always, it's a challenge, but it's the best way to make things change, right? Yeah. And Eloise,
Yeah,
what are you focusing on?
I think similar to what Caitlin and Ollie have just said, but I have a book coming out in October in a couple of months, and it is all about finding purpose. So I guess like my kind of passion for myself and for the people that I work with individually is like finding a sense of existential well-being, you know, like being well in your place in the world and like finding a sense of purpose and meaning and belonging and all of that good stuff. And so the book is really a collection of exercises to help people navigate their own purpose individually. And coming back to the theme of like autonomy and personal responsibility, it's not me like telling you what your purpose is, but it's just like a collection of ways that you can start to do the purpose finding work for yourself. So I'm really excited to like get that out into the world and, you know, support people when they're using it.
Yeah, that sounds great. That sounds great. And how do they articulate that to the people that they're working with? You know, so if I work out that my best way of working is to not speak to any of my team, you know, how would I balance? And you know, that's obviously not realistic, but how would I articulate that to my team? How do other people's purposes play into my own?
Yeah, I mean, there's always this kind of, like you said, there's a sense of having to integrate like yourself within a broader community as well. And the book is really intended for people who are doing their own personal work, but like you said, it then feeds into the rest of their life. I think it's less about like sort of demanding that your current life immediately reflects like your ideal sense of purpose, and more about like understanding the themes and like deeper values that are actually important to you. So it may not be that you like hate talking to your team, but it may just be that you're an independent learner, in which case over the long term you can make decisions that kind of align your life more with that theme or with that value. And you know, long term it might mean transitioning between careers or taking a break and deciding to do something else, or it might just mean speaking to your team to navigate like a job that's more tailored to your own demands, or you know, it might just mean making small adjustments within your own working life that you can continue working the job that you love, but just with some sort of different styles or different manners of working. Like Ollie said, maybe like switching up your working environment or whatever it is, like working in a different way. So I think it's like an individual question for everyone, but I think it can be less like right and wrong and more just like a better understanding of yourself so you can navigate it properly.
Got you. Thanks, Eloise. That's a brilliant place to finish.